Isaiah Buggs and Robert Spillane, as big of stars for the Steelers as anybody on the team, including Ben Roethlisberger, Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, Cam Hayward, Minka Fitzpatrick. The list goes on and on, Mike Asti. But I'm Matt Gajtka, and this is your Steelers edition of Pittsburgh Postgame. Joining you once again for the biggest game of the year, obviously. And as Mike Tomlin said, his team was happy to be back in the kitchen. He had quite a few gourmet chefs at it, especially at the end. 2 defensive stops in a row to foil Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Steelers win it 28-24 to move to 7-0, and now a couple of games up on Baltimore for the top spot in the AFC North. That's the most important takeaway from this game, from my perspective, is the leg up Pittsburgh has on not just the division title, not too early to talk about that either, but also a first-round playoff bye. Mike, as I mentioned, some names from down the depth chart for sure. Some guys that coming into this season we weren't talking about very much, but that's football. It is, to use the cliche, a game of attrition. And from the start with Spillane's pick 6 in the opening moments of this game, all the way to the end when Isaiah Buggs somehow worked off his block and pulled down Jackson on what looked to be a first down scamper for the Ravens' elusive quarterback. It was about the depth as much as it was about the stars, and that makes this a really fun time to be a Steelers fan, and, well, a great time to be a Steeler because here they are atop the entire National Football League.
Well, it's a great Steelers team, but it's also an historic Steelers team. It's still amazing to me to think this is only the second time in Steelers history they have opened up a season 7-0. 7 wins, 0 losses, first time since 1978, only second time ever. That means 3 of those 4 Steel Curtain Super Bowl teams did not start out 7-0, as amazing as that sounds and historic as that sounds, and as much as they beat up on the league at that time. That means through all the AFC title games and Super Bowl appearances and even the one ring for Cowher, they didn't do it. That means that it hasn't happened under Mike Tomlin, despite all the success. And while there's been a lot of success, this is one of the best starts in Steelers history. And say what you want about the record prior maybe to last week, the Steelers now have put together back-to-back solid victories over 2 quality teams from last year and teams that are contending this year. These are undisputed wins that nobody can even try to debate. And Matt, also, this game, it gave us Steelers-Ravens, which for me has been the best rivalry in the NFL for really the better part of the last 2 decades. It's been 2 teams that have been consistent contenders that haven't really taken a dip despite a couple years off with some drama for most of those last 2 decades. It's Tomlin, it's Harbaugh. They've coached against each other 25 times, the 4th most in league history, as amazing as that is. It's been Hall of Famers galore. It's been teams that have both won championships during that time, so it's not like Yankees, Red Sox for 86 years was one doing it, the other being cursed. It's 2 teams that have been trading off years that they're both contending for titles, then actually getting the job done. And the last few years, certainly with the Steelers taking off because of all the drama, it's felt like this rivalry has taken a little bit of a dip. The Ravens still a contender, but the Steelers not as much and not dealing with their full stars on the field. This game, this season has brought this rivalry back to being the best in football again for me. It's 2 teams that are certainly contenders, not only for the division, but for the conference. Either one of these teams could be in the Super Bowl, and it wouldn't surprise anybody. And this was a close game, wire to wire. The Steelers won it. It doesn't mean that they couldn't lose it the next time they play on Thanksgiving night. But I think, Matt, the way the Steelers won this game is also great for this team because they started off trailing. They started off being humbled a little bit offensively, that even against Tennessee, they weren't. And they certainly have had a great offense most of this season with all the talent and all the points they've been putting up. They eventually had to turn it on in the second half. They had to make adjustments. Big Ben had to play better. He had to kind of find himself to be more of that point guard on the field and kind of manage the game, which is not an insult, but that's what he's been doing most of this year when he's had success. And while some of the stars, at least offensively, didn't get to have the big gaudy fantasy numbers, some of these Steelers fantasy owners might not have viewed this game as a win. The way they won, the fact this went down the wire and they got the win, and of course the 7-0 start to the season, the leg up on the Ravens, basically secure for a minimum some type of playoff appearance. All of that, a big win for this team in particular with these players, but also for this franchise and for these fans after what has been dealt with the last couple of years.
Mike, I think it's very appropriate that you referenced the win against Tennessee as a parallel win to this one, both on the road, obviously, and winning on the road isn't quite as difficult. Not a lot of crowd noise, just over 4,000 at M&T Bank Stadium this Sunday, which would typically have been a frothing capacity crowd in the in Maryland's biggest city, and certainly a place where the Steelers are public enemies, number one, year in and year out. But take nothing away from the Steelers for that. They've won back-to-back on the road against teams that were and are looking like real AFC, if not Super Bowl contenders in this 2020 season. But also this was a mirror image of the win against Tennessee, because the Steelers, you alluded to the fact they trailed early. That was, an odious first half for them, particularly on the offensive side. There just wasn't a lot going on, just 4 completions for Ben Roethlisberger on all his drop back passes. He only completed 4 and they were out of the shotgun. His drop backs, he was completely completionless in the first half. And I think he went 1 out of 8 or 1 out of 9 in a span stretching the first half and the second half. But after the interception that started that second half and got the Steelers going, from Alex Highsmith, pardon me, his name eluded me for a moment, another player down the depth chart. But that got them clicking. Eric Ebron waltzes in for a touchdown. Suddenly they're within a score. And what we saw in that second quarter was quickly wiped away. Now, the Ravens had plenty of fight left. And if you look at some of these indicators, Mike, rushing yards for the Ravens, how do you like 265 on 47 carries? And there were a lot of different looks out of those carries. Quarterback keepers, options, some things that were giving the Steelers plenty of trouble. J.K. Dobbins on that final, second to last drive, the last real drive for the Ravens in which they got inside the 10. Dobbins was taking those option pitches from Jackson, and it didn't look like Pittsburgh had an answer until they finally did. But Dobbins averaged 7.5 yards per carry. And even Lamar Jackson, despite a couple of picks, and should have been 3 really if Joe Hayden hangs onto that one late in the second quarter, Jackson had 208 yards through the air, but completed under 50% of his passes. So he was what we thought he was in the end, but it's still a lot of offensive success for Baltimore in that really diverse and I think a fun attack to watch, especially with a guy like Jackson at the helm. But still, the Steelers execute and they get the offense going. And as much as I talked about the defense and the stops at the end, Mike, this still feels like a game where the offense won it, for lack of a better term, because they got it clicking. That final scoring drive for the Steelers, I wanted to ask your opinion on that, because Pittsburgh essentially took all the backs off the field. It was all about Ben and the receivers, and that's when they looked at their best. So for me, even despite the fact that we get all the hype about smash mouth football, and it still is, it's a physical game, but the Steelers are a passing offense, and they're a pass-first team, or at least they should be in my mind.
Well, I also think, Matt, honestly, you're correct in everything you're saying there. But this Steelers team is a pass-first offense. The offense has to win them games. The offense did win them this game eventually. But it's Steelers-Ravens 2020, not Steelers-Ravens 2004. This rivalry includes a lot of history, and a lot of history is there and always going to be brought up. I certainly did in my open of this show. But this rivalry has adapted with the times. Like a lot of things have to in this world. This rivalry is still smash mouth. We saw a fight. We saw a scrum in the middle of this game. Steelers haven't really been doing that much recently. Tomlin usually would be upset about that. We saw coaches and players jawing with each other. We saw emotions of that. We've seen it all in this game. We saw mistakes and dumb plays from teams. We saw bad penalties. We saw mental mistakes that could lead you to a loss in this game. We saw both coaches kind of getting into it and Tomlin being very involved with the officials. That's Steelers-Ravens. That's what you got more in this game than you've got throughout most of the season for both of these two teams. These are two quality teams. And, of course, there's going to be more offense. There's going to be more of this game predicated on the offense than in years past. They're going to need to rely on the offense more in years past because teams to win a championship in this day and age need to be driven by the offense. I get Ben again is not what he was years ago. He's not in his prime. They keep bringing up the MVP votes. Unfortunately, he didn't get any votes. He's not ever going to win an award. So sorry for him. He'll be in the Hall of Fame someday. But the reason why this team is a championship contender is because he doesn't care about that. He's trying to just figure out what's best for the offense, involve everybody he can, realize how deep this team is offensively and defensively. I mean, my guy, Nick Farabaugh, who I'm going to get on either this show or my personal one here coming up, he's with us at Steelers Now. He immediately brought up Alex Highsmith's potential impact on my draft show the second he was drafted, and that's finally coming into fruition. We've seen players. I was bringing this up when we were doing shows at the beginning of the season. I was loving Eric Ebron, said it would be the best off-season acquisition. I looked like an idiot for several weeks. It's finally coming to fruition because he's finally figuring out the offense. He's being used in the red zone. A lot of this, and we also brought up how there was no preseason, so you maybe have to give a mulligan that first quarter of the year. But a lot of this is now being figured out. These two teams are really, really good, and they're both adjusting and adapting with two, I'll say it, both Hall of Fame coaches based on what you need resume-wise to get in there, being willing to adjust and adapt to the modern game. If they were still thinking to themselves, I want 2002, I want 2008, Steelers, Ravens, punch them in the mouth, then one of these teams would lose and would not be a contender this year. You need to have some explosiveness. They do. Saw that with Chase Claypool's big catch at the end to get in the end zone. That's a big moment for him in his young career. I say at the time, the only way his young season could be any better, a historic rookie year being compared to Randy Moss, is to get a big touchdown catch to beat a rival at the end, in particular the Ravens. He does it. So it's big all the way around. But I also think kind of also what you're alluding to, if I'm the Ravens, if I'm Harbaugh, if I'm even a Ravens fan or somebody on a digital media outlet for Baltimore covering this game, I'm not too upset either. This is a game that they had to play really well in to get a win. They're facing off against an undefeated team that they knew was going to be the other contender in the conference, regardless of last year. They were well aware how close Pittsburgh got without Ben last year. They knew they were going to be a contender this year. Those games were still close last year. And yes, they blew a lead. Like, that's how the record's going to show it. But I'm sure they figured they weren't going to be blowing out the Steelers. They had a chance at the end. It didn't happen for them. But they're very much still a contender. They're very much still going to be involved. I would say, Matt, I wouldn't be concerned if I'm the Ravens for this year. But what I do think this game exposed, and the Steelers exposed this more than any other team in his young career, Lamar Jackson is an MVP. I'm glad he's had success. He's a great quarterback. He's fun to watch. They're very dynamic with Hollywood Brown and company. Love how AB's cousin is there for the ironic twist for the rivalry. But I would have concern for Lamar Jackson having the longevity of success that, say, Big Ben has had, the way he's playing. We've already seen the dip for Cam Newton for several years now. His career is hanging on by a thread. Belichick basically made it clear he's probably not finishing this season, with them already losing again today. And while he's a former MVP and borderline Hall of Fame and had a great beginning to his career, if you're a quarterback who is athletic and you can rely on athleticism, wonderful. He has the deep ball like Cam did. But if you don't have the ability to drop back and complete passes and have a completion percentage that is consistently at a certain level, you're going to just be a bar lower than certain legendary quarterbacks that have played in this same era, which could potentially put your team a bar lower. Might not affect them now, but his style does give me concern for years to come. But for the present day, the Steelers won a big game against a really, really good team. The rivalry is back into thriving, and they have adjusted to modern football. And right now, I think it's really an argument whether the Steelers are the best team in the whole NFL or whether that's the Chiefs or the Seahawks. This is an undefeated Steelers team that now has back-to-back legit wins. And what you're saying, you could argue 3 in a row quality wins if people want to be fair to the Browns, who are, despite a loss today, are a good team.
Yeah, Browns, I suppose we could debate their legitimacy, but
sure.
Tennessee, at Baltimore, Mike, they've gotten past the precipice here. The peak of schedule strength is now behind them, in my view here. They go to Dallas coming up, and then their tough games are at home. They're going to have, they have at Cincinnati, which is looking like it could be a little more difficult than we anticipated. The Bengals are picking up some steam.
Maybe.
Joe Burrow starting to get his legs under him and his arm going. That one's late in the year. That's the third to last game of the season. So that's one I have circled there as a potential stumbling block for them. Then, of course, Baltimore at home on Thanksgiving night. That'll be a lot of fun if this game is any indication. And I mentioned the Bengals come in a couple of weeks. But outside of that, I don't really see that many challenges left. They're 7-0, and it feels like to me they can make a legit run at an undefeated season. I know that might be something that Steelers fans don't want to talk about. You don't want to, quote, jinx it or whatever. But hey, it's our job to project. And I'm starting to see a zero in the loss column at the end of the regular season be a very feasible thing. Now they've gotten past Baltimore. This for me was the big challenge. And even though they played, you could argue, just one really good half. It was a really good half, but it was just one half of solid football. Nonetheless, they have again gotten through it. And just like last week against Tennessee, where they played great in one half and not so great in the other, it was just enough to win. Last week, that was more off the foot of Stephen Gostkowski. You could definitely still send him your flowers and your thank you cards for his late miss, because the Titans had all the momentum late in that game. But today, a totally different case. And it didn't come down to kicking. It came down to making plays at the line of scrimmage. And we talked about defense, and we talked about some of the guys further down the depth chart. I don't want to gloss over the fact that we saw Cam Hayward get hurt late in this game. You're already missing a couple of key players on the defensive side, Tyson Alualu as well. So even though their backups came through, and we're still seeing Bush's backup come through, we have to still be concerned about that, I think, because there's still more than half the season to go.
Yeah, and this team has had to, and don't forget, this team has had to get over Devin Bush. When Devin Bush went down, many thought, well, that's the one linebacker position that can't be replaced. And people weren't wrong, but they're still winning. This team has had to get over Mike Hilton not playing now for back-to-back weeks and throughout this entire week. I'll say it. I thought he was playing this game. Seems like most of my colleagues thought he was playing this game. It seemed to allude he was playing this game. All of a sudden, he's not playing this game, this being the biggest game of the year. So that does make you wonder, Matt, if you think he's playing, it's a big game. Obviously, he wants to play. Tomlin wants him there. Why is he not playing? Is this a lingering issue? Will he be playing next week? Is that going to be a problem? They certainly can win without him. I wouldn't say there's any one player on this team, aside from maybe Ben Roethlisberger, that if he's not there, the sky will fall. This team has proven they're very, very deep. But this season now is about what we are both saying and have been saying all year. And now we're 7 games in. It's very, very legitimate to say that this is becoming a season that, if not for a deep playoff run, you hate to say championship or bust, but I would say honestly, anything shy, because obviously there's still great teams out there, anything shy of an AFC conference championship game appearance is a failure at this point. You hate to go there, but that is where this team is. And it also goes to what you're saying, Matt. The reason why I will say that now, and we know that there is an expanded playoff format, and if they had this format last year, they actually would have got in, and Tomlin never would have missed the playoffs. They don't have to worry about this year. That's kind of funny. But this team is basically assured to get a 1 or a 2 seed, 3 at the very, very worst, if the wheels totally fall off. But when you look at this schedule, Matt, the Dallas Cowboys were absolutely a game. There's history there too, that everybody circled on their calendar. The national media was going to celebrate over. It was going to be a very, very tough game. We are now at the point where I don't think the national media is going to care that much. The Steelers are probably going to be favored to win by, I would say, at least 7.5 on Vegas odds, if not more. This Cowboys team no longer has Dak Prescott, who is the leader of that team. That Dallas team no longer has Andy Dalton, who is the familiar face, who is a quality starter in this league to lead that team. The coverage here, I'll tell you, Pittsburgh media-wise, Matt, is going to be Ben DiNucci versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The hometown kid who went to Pitt and then left Pitt to finally get to play now in the NFL, and all of a sudden started today. I haven't looked at his numbers, but that's going to be the storyline potentially for that game. So the Steelers should win. You mentioned the Bengals. Yeah, Joe Burrow's playing well. I love him. I hope he plays well. I think he's great for the NFL with his cocky swag, and I hope he actually has success and resurrects that franchise. But to be honest with you, the game plan for the Steelers defense and the way the Steelers are built with a pass rush that is getting into record-setting numbers. They're being compared to the 02 Bucks, the 2000 Ravens, the 85 Bears. Those teams, it's not crazy. That's what they're doing. That defense is going to be a problem for a young quarterback. I don't care how good he is. So the way the Steelers are built is a problem for these teams left. I'm not going to say this team goes undefeated. Of course, we've seen that in regular seasons twice in league history. The finish the job, the 72 Dolphins, and they had a couple less games. Of course, the recent team being the 2007 New England Patriots, who honestly, Matt, for my money, are the best team in league history, even though they lost the Super Bowl. They dominated the league the entire year with Hall of Famers and lost by a few points in that last game on some flukes. So I give it to them, even though they didn't win a title. But that team was running up and down the field, winning by 20 every week. So it's different if this would happen. It's not really a comparison, but if they win, it'll count the same. I feel like they have to lose a game. I mean, they're just going to. Even in that 2004 year, they blew one at, towards the end at some point, or towards the beginning before Ben took over, and then eventually lost in the title game. I don't know. They're going to lose one of these. Maybe they're laying an egg in one of these. They shouldn't lose. It's hard to believe they're going to beat the Ravens twice in a year. I could see that being a loss, even though that would be the home game. But still, worst case scenario, they go 14-2. They're very likely still a top seed, if not the second seed, because the Ravens already have 2 losses, including one to Pittsburgh. The Chiefs could win out, but maybe they would lose as well. A lot to love about this team more than just this game, and they've kept proving themselves. And there's a lot of reason to be excited, for sure, especially for a hungry fan base, despite an illustrious franchise.
Hungry fan base. Let's just talk overall Pittsburgh sports. Pitt looks like it's in the tank again, and there's going to be nothing going on, Mike. It looks like until Valentine's Day at the rate that COVID is picking up, and we're looking at the NHL not coming back until February. So the Steelers have the stage, so we're all paying very close and rapt attention.
This would be the year to go undefeated in the regular season. This would absolutely be the year. They would certainly get coverage.
They never struggle for it anyway, even when they're 6-10, which hasn't happened in a long time. You mentioned the 2004 team, the Steelers. They lost in Baltimore. That was the game that Tommy Maddox got hurt. So even that one was a little bit questionable in terms of legitimacy and how much that was a discredit against that year's team. That was the best Steelers regular season we've seen in our lifetimes, or at least our generation's experience with the Steelers. But we're starting to get that feel. Remember mid-season that year as well, the Steelers knocked off back-to-back undefeated teams. They beat the Patriots at home, which was a huge deal at that time, obviously, and then they beat the Eagles at home. This time they get those 2 massive milestone-type games out of the way on the road, and they win both of them in close fashion here. Really 28-24 is your final score. Steelers over the Ravens. I want to talk offense here, Mike. It was very spread out on the offensive side. I thought James Conner showed some pretty good burst early on in this game, but I think the Steelers were guilty of going too many times to the well with him in the first half. He's not a 2 down out of every 3 down type of a back. He's a 1 down out of every 3 downs type of a back, in my opinion. So I think perhaps they got a little bit away from what they should have been trying to do, get the ball out quick, get it to the receivers like they have been this year. Eventually they did. Juju Smith-Schuster with the quietest 7 catches for 67 yards. That's some tough ones.
He was getting killed in the first half by people out there, and he ended up with the best day.
Oh, yeah. He was fighting for extra yardage, holding onto the ball with both hands, making sure he didn't turn it over, targeted 8 times, caught 7 of them. So many of them, it felt like all of them were those quick slants on the inside. You mentioned your boy, Eric Ebron. Bravo to him, because he had, I think, his most visible game and was coming up with the ball in traffic. Claypool, 5 receptions for 42. Conner out of the backfield 3 times as well. So there was plenty of, credit to go around, honestly, on the offensive side. And I think eventually for Randy Fiechner and Matt Canada on the play calling side too, they just got back to what they should have been doing. In my view, they were trying a little too hard to bust the Ravens in the mouth and play their game and throw their rushing attack right back at them. The Steelers don't have the rushing game of the Ravens, and nor should they try to. It's a different type of rushing attack anyway, because the quarterback is such a huge part of it. That's not the case with the Steelers. So I'm glad that all involved came to their senses. Maybe it took them trailing, Mike, to shift into that quicker tempo gear. And I think Ben was trying at times in the first half to get the ball out quickly, but the Ravens pass rush, I'll give them credit too. They were getting in his face. So a combination of things. As always, it starts at the line of scrimmage. So I want to also ladle on some praise for the offensive line too, because Ben was rarely touched or even brushed up against in that second half.
I think the offensive line needs tons of praise most of this season, because obviously an offensive line is an important part of any successful team. But it's certainly this year, when you have an older quarterback coming off of an injury, you have tons of weapons, but you have a team that's so pass heavy, doesn't really have a featured back, at least for me. Conner has been good, but he certainly can't 35 carry along and blast you 200 yards. He's on Ezekiel Elliott out there. So the offensive line having to do work, and it has done work most of this season. I think, Matt, it's kind of funny, and hearing you talk, and I just thought of this, and it's really, really true. If this Steelers team that we're watching, just off a pure eye test, but certainly the numbers bear this out, certainly with who we see on this roster, was not called the Pittsburgh Steelers, we'd be saying there's not even reason to talk about that they're not a team that can run. They're, of course, not a run-first team. Look at this. It's clearly a passing team. This is a team you'd want on your fantasy roster. This is a team to build to win a championship. It's very modern of a team. The only reason why it seems like, and myself included, there is some qualifier. The people who've been fans a long time or have covered this team a long time or just around Pittsburgh media circles like yourself a long time, even if not, say, covering the Steelers, they have to throw out there with, well, they, and they do. They need to do more running the football. They didn't do that much running the football. All of those qualifiers, kind of like non-traditional Steelers football, but happening this year, is because they're the Steelers and the Steelers way, and you're used to Jerome Bettis and those teams. And even Le'Veon Bell in years past being so dynamic both sides, but he still was a featured back for those couple years. This is just a Steeler team that is very much almost like a New Orleans Saints of recent memory, where they have a quarterback, he can air it out, he doesn't want to make mistakes, he can be a gunslinger, he also can be careful, he's a Hall of Famer, tons of weapons around, running backs that can give you 100 every now and then, but that's not what you're going to predict them to do coming into the game. If they don't, you can easily still win. A defense that has a lot of takeaways and wins that way with a pass rush, very similar to the Saints. But I would think there's going to be a lot of fans that if they hear me compare the Steelers to the Saints, they're going to say that doesn't make sense. But when you look at it, it really is similar to what the Saints have done the last couple of years. I would say, though, Matt, and it's hard to go this route on this show now, but the only concern you can have, and the only reason why my tweet qualified, as we like to do with the Steelers have a legit argument rather than being the best team in football right now, is because to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, it's the Ric Flair, to be the man, you got to beat the man. They are the man right now. They have the championship. They have the younger Hall of Fame potential pace quarterback. They have a lot of talent as well. And if you get down by 10, 17 against the Chiefs, they are going to be very, very tough to come back on. They can keep piling it on. They are built similarly, but they have a little bit more of a running game now. They actually don't even need Le'Veon Bell, and they proved that today, who they added. So they have almost too much talent there to be able to use. They have a defense also predicated on looking for turnovers. That's how they won last year. Very similar to the Steelers. Very similar teams, but younger and maybe more dynamic with the Chiefs. So that's the team you have to look to as potentially that AFC title game opponent right now. Them and the Ravens, I would figure. Maybe if a crazy thing occurs, then it's Buffalo or something. But I would think that if you get down against that team, you're going to have problems. It might be close. You could still come back, but you're probably going to lose. So that is the issue. That's the team you got to gauge yourself against right now. And while they've been winning and they have these quality wins, they've been playing well and it's all great, there are still things to look at for the Steelers that are certainly far from perfect. And maybe we need to start saying aren't matched up well to the Chiefs. But aside from that, there's a lot of reason to be positive. I will bring up here, I know Alan's digging for this right now. We don't have any word, at least from what I've seen, on Hayward's severity of his injury, because I see it's a lot in the chat here. That did not look good at the end. I'm assuming he's not, out for the year or anything that bad. It didn't look to be that direction. I honestly don't know right now. I'm not on the Zooms. From what I see as the post we're about to throw up on Steelers now, there's not an actual statement that, any definitive comment on that injury. But he's a player you don't want to lose unless you've seen something else, just from what I've seen to this point.
No, I haven't. Well, Mike, you're on a Zoom. This is the only Zoom that matters right now.
Right. This is the only Zoom that matters for me. That's very, very true.
It's like the Clash, the only band that matters. This is the only Zoom that matters. This is Pittsburgh Postgame on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Let's reset it here. We'll call it halftime.
Together, yeah.
Let's call it halftime of our show. I want to remind you, if you like what you see, and we do have a lot of live viewers right now. Hey, the Steelers are 7-0. It's not exactly all sunshine and rainbows, but it's pretty darn close at this moment as we approach the halfway point of the NFL season. Okay. Remember to like the channel and also subscribe So then you get that little indicator, that thing that pops up on your device screen whenever we go live. Mike Asti does a lot of live shows on this very channel. We also have plenty of player interviews after games. We have Steelers practice highlights if you're into that sort of thing, which I know you are.
Yeah, you are based on the numbers.
Yeah, you definitely are. That's been very fruitful for us. We're going to continue to put that type of content out there. But also just whatever Pittsburgh sports you got, even my Pittsburgh Golf Now course reviews, if you're into that sort of thing. It's all on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And I also want to get to some of the comments here. Plenty of different names, new names that we're seeing here on the sidebar. The live chat is active on the right side of your screen. Sean Moore, he says a win is a win, which, yes, obviously, especially in the NFL, where there aren't 162 games or 82 games to even things out. To pull these out, it has more of an impact than it does in other sports. And it's such a swing from one game to the next. So 7-0, he says to the haters, accept that. Apparently there are plenty of haters because Stay Black and Gold for Life says, I love how there's always an excuse when we win. He's mentioning that there are people on the Ravens feed saying that the Ravens aren't legit, and that's how they're going to discredit the Steelers in picking up this win. The Ravens are pretty good.
No, they're really good.
The Ravens did a lot of good things, and they victimized the Steelers in at least one way I want to talk about in just a moment here. 7-0 is 7-0. That sounds very obvious to say. But in a year like this, where every team has had to, essentially have training camp on the fly, right, early in the year, I think it's rather impressive to get your kinks out while also piling up the W's. So that's where they are. They're, at least in one way, atop the National Football League as of right now. Red Sliv says Deontay Johnson and Claypool are our next number one receivers. I do want to ask you your opinion on that, Mike. Where is this receiver hierarchy right now? Because we came into the season talking about Juju, right? And whether or what he would show in this season leading up to a contract decision for the Steelers. Now, we just got done praising his ability to be the possession guy and hang on to the ball and maybe play like a Hines Ward type role in this game. I saw that thrown out on social media, and I don't disagree. But Deontay Johnson has stayed healthy for a few weeks in a row, knock on wood. And Chase Claypool, we've discussed him at length here. So what do you think is the hierarchy? Does there have to be even a hierarchy with this receiving core? Because a night like tonight or a day like today shows you that maybe there is really not a clear number one or a clear number two.
Well, Matt, I'll tell you right now, there's not a Steelers hierarchy for the Steelers or for Ben Roethlisberger, in my view. And that's the most important thing. I really do feel, and coming into the year, the pressure, I certainly put it on him as well as many of my colleagues, fans were even wondering this. It got national media attention as well, that there was tons of pressure on Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, I said it before coming into the year that Juju and Connor were the two players, throw Aaron Rodgers maybe in to try to win a second ring, but that had the most pressure on them to do well this year. And I don't think anybody out there, certainly when you're looking for a contract, are going to let anyone say, well, COVID, no off season, no preseason, training camp different, all of that. Juju's looking for some money, Matt. Nobody would have been able to say he didn't get it done last year, but you can use the excuse of the quarterbacks. See, even the year before, he played really, really maybe better than AB. Year prior to that, AB still helping him with taking the double coverage. But if he struggled this year, nobody was going to be able to say it was because of this or because of that. It was eventually he just didn't get it done as the number one. He has proven to be a for sure gamer. He has proven to be more mature than I think some give him credit, that the wheels did not fall off for him mentally when he was struggling to get numbers early in the season, like some maybe would predict. He didn't have the gaudy numbers, but he was right up there in terms of receptions. He just wasn't breaking it for yards after the catch and giving you the Chase Claypool, I'm going to turn a 10-yard dumper into the end zone, which, if you remember, Matt, Chase Claypool's season this year, when's the last time you can remember that happening for a Steelers rookie? Oh, wait, 2 years ago with Juju. So it's not like it's crazy far away that this similar thing happened. Juju had that 97-yarder a few years ago his rookie season. That was his coming out party. Claypool did it a few weeks ago, last time you were joining me for this, for his record-setting day with the 4 TDs. So Claypool's a rookie. It's hard to remember that. He is a rookie. He's very, very good. I think he's fitting in even above expectations for what they wanted him to do in terms of that big, bulky, an all-time comparison, maybe more of a TO, where he's not lanky. He doesn't have the all-time speed, but he can get down there. He can go through the middle. He can do the routes. He's a beast. He's proven that. He's still getting it done. Deontay Johnson, He's been great too. He certainly was great last year without Big Ben being there mostly. I think he would be the guy that was emerging this year if it was not for Claypool being there, if it was not for Big Ben being there, if it was not for his injuries being another issue. He's not been healthy this season, so it's not necessarily fair to him. And he did leave this game early on and have to go into the tent. So literally the Cal Ripken streak of him going to the tent every game he plays ends up continuing. You want to see him get a whole game in healthy, but he's been great when in there. I would say, to quickly answer, there's no hierarchy legit. There's no 1, 2, 3. I think it is whoever has the best day, Ben will keep feeding. He really wants to diversify the offense. I will say, Matt, I will take the bait, though, in the second part of your question. I think, and this sucks to say in a way for a lot of Steeler fans, regardless of what happens this year and how well Juju plays, I still don't see him on this team next year. And I think as the only way he's on this team next year is if, and he said he might be willing to do this, but we'll see because he loves Pittsburgh so much. If he wants money, which I'm not going to fault him because you need to cash in at some point as an athlete, but if he wants the big payday, it's not on the Steelers, unfortunately, for him. If he wants to be a part of the Steelers because he wants to eventually maybe have a Hall of Fame vote because of Hines Ward on great teams, or even Julian Edelman, who I don't think is there but gets conversation because he's on those great teams with the Patriots, and he wants to ride what could be maybe a dynasty, or for at least a year or two until Ben retires, could be a title or so. If he wants to do that, great. And they will certainly bring him back. They like him there. I think they all like him. The problem is they aren't going to offer him tons of money. I don't believe that. And it's not just because of AB or antics or what anybody out there wants to turn that into a narrative. The reason why is a very football reason, which you already said. Chase Claypool already is fitting very similar in, could replace him if he needs to step up even further. Deontay Johnson, if he can get healthy, can fit in there. Don't forget James Washington exists and was great last year. He hasn't been having to do that this year, but he is there. They can draft receivers in their sleep and turn them into all pros. It's been proven for 15 years, whether you have hype or not. The Steelers draft you and you have success for several years in the NFL. It's been almost a guarantee. So I feel like they think they're going to be able to replace somebody. They can do it for low cost. They don't need to pay tons of money to a receiver. I'd be concerned about anybody else getting a big money deal. So I don't think Juju's long-term success has anything to do with him playing really, really well, even though you like to see it. I think everyone else being so good could actually hurt his future if he wants the money. But as we stand the here and now, I think it's a moving door in terms of 1, 2, or 3. Any of them being your 1, 2, or 3 is great for your team. I think it could switch week to week. Juju probably is the quintessential one, with Claypool being the 2 and then Deontay Johnson the 3 to actually answer you. But it could change next week. But I don't think Juju's here next year because why pay him tons of money when you can fit in other receivers constantly? This is a salary cap sport. It just might be that smart business-wise.
Well, a question for down the line. As for the here and now, he's Mike Asti. I'm Matt Gajtka. We're talking about the Steelers' 7th win in 7 tries here in 2020, bringing a light, shining bright into your lives. And, what's becoming, as I look out my window, a very dark and depressing Sunday here in Pittsburgh, PA.
Gotham City.
It's going to snow. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Later tonight. We've already seen that across the NFL. Mike, a remarkable stat. You tweeted out something from the Steelers saying that they lead the NFL in turnovers over the past, season and a half at this point. They have now forced Lamar Jackson into 6 turnovers in the last 2 times they've played him. Both those games coming in Baltimore. But today, 4 turnovers, 2 interceptions. Like I mentioned, could have been 3 if Hayden can hang on to that diving attempted pick late in the first half. And the 2 picks that were made were by linebackers, of all people. 1 taken to the house. And then Jackson lost 2 fumbles out of his 3. So in my mind, I don't know if the Steelers have found some magic formula to defending him, but they have discovered a way to make that kind of high volatility game that Lamar Jackson plays at least tilt in their favor enough to stop him enough to give their offense a chance to take the lead and win the game, as we saw today. But I do want to talk about some weak points. The Steelers secondary appeared to be leaking oil there in that second half. And it's only natural, Mike, right? Because the run game was gashing them to such a degree. You're going to start to push bodies up, and you're missing some real turf eaters, some guys who cover some ground, like a Devin Bush out there, like a Mike Hilton, your leading tackler, who misses another game here. So Robert Spillane, yes, he made the pick and had a couple of passes defense, including a big one on third down. But overall, you're losing some coverage there. Abilities. And I know Minkah Fitzpatrick was the one who was trailing the play a lot of times. You saw Terrell Edmonds also maybe look not lost, but there were some blown coverages mixed in there. I know it's hard to play a perfect game in today's NFL as a secondary, but does any of that concern you going ahead? Because there are some quarterbacks ahead for the Steelers, maybe even Joe Burrow in a couple of weeks at home that can victimize them in that way.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're maybe, if they're going to lose, you're going in that direction.
I'm trying to talk myself into the Bengals, I suppose, but here I am.
I think it'd be cool if Joe Burrow was on a run after the last year that he had in college football. Not that this is going to happen, but for Pittsburgh Sports face-off and some trivia, to win a championship calendar year, college and pro, that's going back to Tony Dorsett, winning a national title and then doing it as a rookie in the NFL. Not saying that Burrow and the Bengals are going to go do that, but nonetheless, it's looking like something to at least say. That stat that you had me dig here as I scanned my Twitter here to fully bring up. By the way, that was before, I believe, 2 more takeaways occurred. I think that was early in the game, maybe early in the second half. But the stat that I had at the time, so I'm going to adjust it now, Steelers are tied for the NFL lead, which I'm assuming they now have, with 48 takeaways. I'm assuming that's now around 49 or 50 since the start of the 2019 season, which goes back, obviously, to last year. And as we know, that was not a playoff season, but a great defensive year, a defense that would have been talked to about as one of the historic defenses if they would have had any offense. Man, I think people do lose sight that defense, if you want to get analytic with it, was one of the best defenses in a while in the league, and that offense was one of the worst in a while in the league. That's why they didn't get into the postseason. That offense flat out sucked. And again, I know it's Duck and Mason, and you're not going to get mad at them because they never had those experiences before. I'm not hating on them, but that's just reality. They couldn't barely move the ball for a while. But the defense with all those takeaways almost still dragged them into the postseason. And TJ Watt probably would have been Defensive Player of the Year, if not Minkah, if they would have got in. So fair or not to them, the offense being so bad probably cost them those awards. But the Steelers have forced at least 1 turnover in 20 of their last 23 games, including 6 of the last 7 here in 2020, and of course 7-0 this season. So one out of these 7, it did not happen. Phenomenal. Now, I will tell you, and I talked about this earlier, at this point, when you're 7-0, you're thinking it's championship. It's who can I compare myself to truly beat. To be the man, you got to beat the man. Who's the man? It's the Chiefs. Can we beat them? Can we beat this Ravens team again? Can we beat the Bills? Can we beat – I mean, honestly, there's not that many teams that I'm nervous about. Can we beat the Seattle Seahawks, say, in a Super Bowl? Because they're maybe the class of the NFC right now. Could we beat the Arizona Cardinals in a Super Bowl appearance because they beat the Seahawks recently and they're going to be a playoff team? That's where your brain legitimately goes at 7-0. And against those teams, I would tell you the Saints, Packers in there as well, despite today. I will tell you the Steelers struggles with having not that much of a running game that you can truly rely on late and still worried about if Connors be healthy by then. That's a concern. Certainly is if you have a lead to turn it. A secondary concern is literally the secondary that you brought up. Those quarterbacks, Rodgers, Breeze, Mahomes, Russell Wilson. I just named you 4 guys that 10 years from now we're going to be sitting in the Hall of Fame, certainly 15, 20 years with Mahomes being a little younger. They can pick apart a secondary that is bad. And the Steelers right now, I'm not going to say the secondary is bad, but it's shown times to have some weaknesses. If Mike Hilton misses more games, that's a concern. Minkah has kind of been blanketed most of this year, like Dion in the 90s. Teams just avoid him. And that is why I think the conversation, would he be able to get over being blanketed this year and being avoided this year? He was mad about that. We'd ask him in the offseason, are you concerned about being taken away from the game? Like, you know, anyone walking you 4 times like he did with Barry Bonds on steroids? And he would say, no. He would kind of get mad. He would say, no, I'm really, really good. I'm going to get over it. We're scheming. I'm an all-pro. Why don't you guys believe in me? It's like, Minkah, we don't not believe in you, but that's clearly what's going on. The defenses are going to scheme. If the bat's taken out of your hands and they give you the four fingers, you can't send it into the bleachers. If they don't throw it over there, What are you going to do? So that's kind of happening a little bit now. Joe Hayden's been spotty despite, his age, and he's certainly been good at times too. I think that's the concern defensively. It is the secondary. When you have this type of pass rush, though, you can get over it because a lot of quarterbacks are not going to have much time, despite how good they are, to figure out where they're throwing because this pass rush is coming and coming fast. But the concern is if they get the ball off, those quarterbacks, the Breeze, the Rodgers, the Wilsons, the Mahomes, they have a quick release. If they get the ball off, they could pick apart the secondary. They could burn the secondary. They could avoid Minka and just pick apart the Joe Haydens of the world on that side. And then that's 3 touchdowns. And then if they have a 2-touchdown leak and the Steelers come back, that's a concern. But, honestly, if they end up losing an AFC title game or losing a Super Bowl based on the last few years, I don't think anybody would have just cause to be too upset. But this has been a great team. There's certainly time to fix it, but I'm sure that's what Tomlin's focusing on. I'm sure that is a concern. But to be fair again, Matt, it's not to say those teams are perfect. It's not to see those guys are perfect. There is no perfect player. There is no perfect team in this year more than any other because of the pandemic and the short off season, the short training camp, and the no preseason. So there are weaknesses the Steelers can expose with those teams too. So you don't know. But if there's a concern that will stop the Steelers from winning a championship, it is the secondary. It is the lack of running game. Otherwise, I'd be shocked if all of a sudden Ben throws 4 picks in the playoff game, or if somebody drops a key pass, or if somebody misses a takeaway, which would be kind of poetic justice the last few years, or if something would occur in a missed kick. These all things could happen, but nothing says that now based on what we've seen.
I think for me, Mike, they're close to critical mass on injuries on the defensive side. That's what I'm concerned about the most. I don't even think it's necessarily a tactical thing or a player talent thing or an execution thing. I think it's about the fact, they burned their bye by no fault of their own, but they burned their bye already to this point. And by the way, Baltimore was coming off a bye and so couldn't pick up the win here. Just a little extra feather in the Steelers' cap as they take the short flight back to Pittsburgh International this evening with the win. Right. But you have Spillane out there. You have Isaiah Buggs out there. You talk about pass rush. You have Terrell Edmonds out there. You have Cameron Sutton out there. So there are players that are getting a lot more playing time than they would normally get. There is time. That's the one thing that is on the Steelers side. There's time for them to get healthy, even if there aren't any real technical off weeks, unless there is a week 18 and the league decides because of some of these COVID postponements, maybe some more to come. Who knows? Of course, all of this is essentially up in the air too because of the pandemic situation. But let's assume that they play out the regular season. I think that's what could possibly hold them back. And then in the playoffs, Mike, yes, I agree that there are some quarterbacks out there that could hurt them, particularly Patrick Mahomes. If you're looking for a potential AFC title game, and I'm like you, I think it's AFC title or bust, not AFC title game or bust, because for me, this Steelers team, because of the ticking clock on Ben Roethlisberger, again, he's looking a little bit gimpy today. I'm not sure what the issue was, but he's 10, 12 years older than Patrick Mahomes. So keep that in mind. The Steelers have more at stake in these coming 1, 2, 3 seasons, I suppose, than the Chiefs do or some other teams do. I know that the league changes in a hurry and, teams' prospects can go up and down, but it's looking like Kansas City's going to be there for a while for one main reason. That's the guy under center. So I think the Steelers have more leverage at stake, if you want to call it that way, this year. And so they got to get that defense back healthy. They have to get those difference makers back on the field. We wait with halting breath news for Cam Hayward because he's such a linchpin. TJ Watt obviously does great work. Bud Dupree is coming to his own, but they can't make as much headways without the guys up front, your Haywards and your Alualus, et cetera, doing their jobs. So that's always been the story for any defense. But I think it's in particular the case here with the strength that the Steelers have with a guy like Cam Hayward, especially on the line. So that's what I'm concerned about. And maybe a little bit, Mike, we can just touch on this as we're getting close to the end of our hour here. But Jordan Berry had some shaky moments. I didn't necessarily agree with the cutting of Colquitt. I thought that was a pretty quick juncture in which to pull the plug on a guy you just signed to a free agent contract in the offseason, which is pretty rare for a punter. Berry came up with a big one there late. I'll give him kudos there to get the Steelers out of a hole and prevent the Ravens from getting a short field. But that's also one thing. If you're looking to nitpick here, they're 7-0, injuries for me, and also possibly the punter not being up to snuff. So it's tough to find him, but I found a couple of nitpicks.
Well, we got to do it. I mean, obviously the secondary, the running game, the injuries. And by the way, SteelersNow.com, we do have content. We do have some updates on Cam Hayward. We do have some updates on Ben with the little elbow situation. Tomlin obviously not giving too much away, but we do have that coverage over there, SteelersNow.com. And that's going to trickle down to Tuesday if we don't have news prior to that and Tomlin's press conference. But I will say, off of your point, new punter, the same as the old punter. I think that adage really makes sense here. Jordan Berry, veteran punter, normally going to be good, could have some issues, older leg. Colquitt, normally good, could have some issues, maybe not as old leg, still kind of an old leg. He had the recent success with the Chiefs. I mean, honestly, Matt, it's the same guy. It was odd I could have argued not even replacing Jordan Berry at all in the offseason. That wasn't necessary to me, despite a poor year last year. You bring in Colquitt, figure he'd be better. He's also a veteran. He's not been better. Jordan Berry was okay today again. It's hard to say that punter situation is going to make the difference for this team winning a title or not, but certainly field position could. I mean, field position could when you're figuring it to be a close game. Yep. It kind of sucks for Colquitt to have a 2 or 3 week tryout, get off the title team. You're now cut from this Steelers team. He's kind of screwed, I guess. But Jordan Berry's back, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, who knows? I mean, that really is though the discussion moving forward. I mean, that's where my show is going to have to go. That's where talk radio is going to have to go. Is comparing this team to the elite teams. They're freaking 7-0. In years past, they would have laid one of these eggs. In years past, they would have lost to Denver when they were coming back with a third-string quarterback. They would have lost the Eagles, who were putting up numbers despite injuries. In years past, they would have lost this game. They would have lost to Tennessee. That field goal would have went through. They would have lost to Cleveland. All of those. Win this year. So they're finding a way. They're getting it done. They're not perfect. Their opponents aren't perfect. The Chiefs are not perfect, despite being a recent title team. I do agree, though, and this is for sure, and this is, again, why they are a comparison to the Saints so much with Breeze. There's, of course, a lot of pressure on the Steelers in the AFC and on the Saints in the NFC, and a little bit less on the Packers in the NFC to win a ring in the next 2 years, because their quarterbacks are basically telling them off their age, or even Rodgers getting beat up so much, I don't have much more room to win another one. So just off age. So that's more of the case than even the Seahawks with Russell Wilson, or certainly the Bills with Josh Allen, or the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, they just won. If they go the AFC title game this year and lose and then win again next year, historically it's going to look like a great tenure for Mahomes. So it's no big deal. But I would say this year, maybe next year, I don't think 3-4 years from now it's going to be the same Ben. He is noticeably showing a little bit of signs of not falling off a cliff, but his one leg is dangling a little. He's still managing these games and doing well, but you never know with somebody to his age and his injury history. So, they're definitely a contender. You don't know. They're not perfect, but I will tell you there is more pressure on them, so we'll see if that comes to roost in the postseason. I don't know if they're as built to face some of those teams that they're going to have to face at some point to win that title, but there's plenty of room to work on it. And really the conversation this week is going to be, are they healthy? They've already dealt with tons of injuries. They won and persevered since those injuries. Can they do it again if they need to? Again, I feel like the only guy they cannot be without and win a championship, which again is what we're saying is the bar now, is Ben. They can't throw Mason or Duck in there, or whoever else off the street in there, and say, I don't need 300 yards, but you need to manage this. They're going to try to do too much. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to freak out. The playbook's going to change. Matt Canada won't be able to do what he's getting paid to do, that he's really been involved in recent weeks. Even if Ben's not an MVP guy anymore, he needs to be there. They need Ben. Cam Hayward's a big deal, but they can get over losing him, unfortunately. But he's certainly a big cog if they would lose him, and that would hurt.
Well, once again, Steelers-Ravens was a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun over the past hour talking about it with you. Quick fact check, Mike, Jordan Berry's 29. Dustin Colquitt was 38, so he's an older leg than Jordan Berry by quite a bit, even though it looks like Jordan Berry is maybe right up there. I don't know. It's some people just look a little bit more aged than others, and I think we've just gotten used to seeing Jordan Berry back there for the Steelers. This
maybe
is now
Colquitt
his
fell off
season.
his cliff because he was good last year. Who knows?
Yeah, he's been fine. He had a couple of rough years early, got better. I don't know. I don't know what to make out of kickers, well, especially punters. It just
we could see
like
him again. If Jordan Berry sucks for 2-3 weeks, they bring him back. I mean, who knows? They could share a ring.
They could all do that. But You made the most relevant point. Ben, rest that arm up, ice that arm up, and get ready for that trip to Dallas next week. The artist formerly known as America's Team will be the opposition next week for Pittsburgh as they head down for, well, finally we get a 4:25 game on CBS. That'll be something different. Back-to-back late afternoon games as the Steelers have swept their first 7 games of the season. This is Pittsburgh Sports Live. Like I mentioned, like and subscribe. Mike's got plenty of content for you. I'll be back with another net front presence on the Penguins off season, and we'll continue to roll out the Steelers coverage for you. Alan Saunders at SteelersNow.com as well, doing some writing in addition to Mike Asti, who runs the show over there. Mike, great to be with you again. Thanks again for having me. I come in for the big ones, right? You got to bring in the big guns.
Absolutely. We got the band back together for this big one here. And the games are getting bigger. I will say it's funny that's the only negative. Makes us work harder and finagle schedules and things trying to cover this, because the bigger the game is, the tougher the game is, the schedule of the game ends up being more of a marquee thing, and they're going to have 4:25 Thanksgiving night. So we'll figure it all out for you guys. But they're winning, so I guess it could be worse. But so best for business clearly based on these numbers. So we appreciate the Steelers winning.
Yeah, judging by the live numbers, Mike, very good for business. So thanks to all of you for watching. Sorry I couldn't get to very many of the comments, but so much to talk about when you have an exciting game like this one, and you have an undefeated Steelers team. So for Mike Asti, for Alan Saunders as well, covering the game, this is Matt Gajtka saying goodbye. We'll talk to you next time for another Steelers edition of Pittsburgh Postgame.